Many families spend a lifetime building meaningful wealth, but what happens after that wealth is passed down can be surprising. Research shows that roughly 70% of wealthy families lose their wealth by the second generation and 90% by the third. And in most cases, it is not because of poor investment returns. More often, it comes down to communication breakdowns, lack of preparation, and the absence of a shared vision for what the wealth is actually meant to do. Today, we're talking about how to keep wealth across generations and how families can build not just financial capital, but the habits and structures that will help wealth endure. Here's the mindset shift I want you to take away. Generational wealth is not preserved by money alone. It is preserved by preparation. The families who do this well focus just as much on education, communication, and governance as they do on investment strategy. I'm David Stevens with Stevens Capital Partners. For many successful families, building wealth is only the first chapter. The harder question is how to make sure that wealth becomes a blessing for children, grandchildren, and future generations rather than a source of confusion, conflict, or even dependency. At some point, many families start asking questions like these. How do we prepare the next generation to handle significant wealth responsibility? How do we keep money from becoming a source of family tension? How do we pass along not just assets, but also values? Those are not just financial questions, they are family leadership questions. Today, I want to walk through three principles that can help families protect and extend wealth across generations, building financial education, creating open communication around wealth, and putting clear family governance in place. Point number one, prioritize financial education for the next generation. One of the biggest reasons generational wealth disappears is that heirs receive assets without knowledge or experience needed to manage them well. When financial literacy is missing, sudden wealth can lead to poor decisions, overspending, or emotional reactions to market volatility. I've seen this play out in very practical ways. Over the last 2 decades, I've had conversations with people who just received an inheritance and told me, I'm only going to buy a couple things, but the rest of the money I'm going to keep invested. Don't worry. Then I ask what they actually need, and it's often a luxury vehicle because their current car is 2 years old and starting to have some issues. In those moments, I quietly think to myself, if this mindset doesn't change, this inheritance may not even last 10 years, because that is often how the bleed of wealth begins. It usually does not disappear all at once. It starts to bleed out slowly through a series of decisions that feel really small, reasonable even, and even justified in the moment. A study by the Williams Group found that 60% of wealth transfer failures are caused by a lack of communication and trust, while 25% are tied to unprepared heirs. That's a reminder that education plays a major role in whether wealth lasts. Here's some quick practical actions. Introduce financial conversations early, even with younger family members. Teach basic investment principles, budgeting, and long-term thinking. Gradually involve the next generation in family financial discussions. So important, encourage heirs to build careers, skills, and independence outside of inherited wealth. Families that preserve wealth well rarely wait until inheritance begins to have these conversations. They really treat financial education as a long-term process, helping the next generation build judgment, discipline, and perspective over time. Because inheriting wealth without preparation can feel less like an opportunity and more like a burden. Point number two, create open communication around wealth. Another major challenge for wealthy families is that money often becomes a topic people avoid instead of discussing openly. Parents may hesitate to talk about wealth because they worry it could affect motivation or create unrealistic expectations. But when the topic stays hidden, the next generation is left guessing about responsibilities, intentions, and long-term plans. I've seen this side of it too. Sometimes children or grandchildren inherit meaningful wealth, but no one ever clearly explained what the money was for. Was it meant to provide security or create opportunity, support future generations, fuel generosity? What's the intent? They don't know. So instead of stewarding the wealth with clarity, they start making decisions in a vacuum. And when purpose is unclear, money can quickly become the source of confusion, guilt, conflict, or even waste. Research from U.S. Trust Insights on Wealth and Worth study found that nearly 60% of wealthy families have not fully disclosed their financial plans to their children, which creates uncertainty around future expectations. Quick, practical actions. Hold periodic family conversations about financial values and priorities. Explain the purpose behind trusts, estate plans, and philanthropic goals. Discuss both opportunities and responsibility that come with wealth. Clarify expectations for how future generations will participate in family financial decisions. What many families discover is that transparency actually builds trust. When the next generation understands the purpose behind the wealth, whether that purpose is security, opportunity, philanthropy, or legacy, they are much more likely to approach it with respect and responsibility. Wealth becomes less about entitlement and more about stewardship. Point number 3. Establish clear family governance and long-term structure. The third pillar of preserving wealth across generations is structure. So important. Without clear governance, decisions around investments, distributions, or shared assets can become emotional, inconsistent, and difficult across generations. That is where formal structures such as trusts, family investment policies, or family councils can make a real difference. Research from the Family Business Institute suggests that only about 30% of family wealth successfully transitions to the second generation, often because of leadership and governance structures that were never clearly defined. Quick practical actions. Create a documented family mission or wealth philosophy. Define roles and responsibilities for financial decision-making. Use trust or estate structures that align with the long-term goals. Establish regular family meetings to review financial strategy and planning. Strong governance does not reduce flexibility, it actually creates clarity. When families define how decisions will be made and who will be involved, they reduce misunderstandings and protect relationships alongside the assets. Because preserving wealth across generations ultimately requires more than financial planning. It requires intentional leadership within the family. So here are a few questions to think about this week. Have we really prepared the next generation to manage wealth responsibly? Do our children or heirs understand the purpose behind our financial decisions? Have we created structures that help wealth serve the family long after we're gone? Generational wealth is not defined by how much money gets passed down. It is defined by how well the next generation is prepared to steward it. Unfortunately, here's one of the realities that oftentimes happens. The first generation builds it, the second generation enjoys it, and the third generation either learns stewardship or loses it. Building wealth is an extraordinary achievement, but keeping it across generations requires a different type of intentionality. It requires preparing heirs, having honest conversations, and building structures that support both assets and the family. Because in the end, wealth is not truly preserved by how much money is passed down. It is preserved by the character, wisdom, and stewardship of the people receiving it. If this topic resonates with you and your family and you'd like help thinking through long-term generational wealth planning, we would be honored to help. At Stevens Capital Partners, we work closely with families to build plans that not only grow wealth, but help that wealth support future generations with clarity and intention. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and like the video so you don't miss out on future conversations. I am David Stevens with Stevens Capital Partners. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I'll see you next time.